We
are
We
are cultivate.
Cultivate.
We are cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Ye Olde Crime, where we discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear. I'm your host, Lindsay Valenti, and joining me today is a very special guest, Judith Starkston. Judith Starkston has spent too much time reading about and exploring the remains of the ancient worlds of the Greeks and Hittites. Early on, she went so far as to get 2 degrees in classics from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and Cornell. She loves myths and telling stories. This has gradually gotten more and more out of hand. Her solution: to write fantasy set in the exotic worlds of the past, fantasy and magic in a Bronze Age world. Hand of Fire was a semifinalist for the M.M. Bennett's Award for Historical Fiction. Priestess of Ishana won the San Diego State University Conference Choice Award. So, Judith, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited.
So, we connected on Podmatch when you reached out about discussing your series on the Hitolian Empire and specifically Tesha, the Priestess of Ishana. Can you give us a brief synopsis of the series? I mean, you don't have to be brief, but...
The series is inspired by an actual historic queen of the Hittite Empire, which, because I write fantasy, I call it Hitolian, so that everyone knows what I'm referring to. I don't hide the history at all, but
Yep.
It is fantasy. And so when we first meet her on the historic stage, she's 15 years old. And that's where my series starts. And we know historically at a certain moment in time, she met the man who would become her husband. And that's the place where my series starts. And he is the younger brother of the great king. So he's kind of an important royal family member, but not the big guy. He comes to where she lives, where she's a priestess. He is also a priest of the same goddess, Ishana, who is the goddess of love and war. And he's on his way back after a year's delay for various diplomatic and political reasons from this big, huge war between who are historically the Egyptians, in my series called the Agarians, and the Hitolian Empire. And he has vowed that if he won for his brother, who was the great king, that he would dedicate his share of the loot to his goddess. So he's here at the biggest temple in the empire to make this offering. And all kinds of bad things happen to him. He's also, and she has to extricate him from the troubles because he gets locked away. The Hittites they were absolutely obsessed with the concept of curses. I could curse the queen and make her health go down. I could curse a whole city. They had curses here, there, everywhere. And they had actual rites for removing those curses. So I used that concept to get him. It's true that there were only one category of crime that you could get executed for, and they were all religious things. And sorcery was the big pollution.
Okay.
And so if you were convicted of sorcery, off with your head, but not other things. So if you're trying to get rid of your political opponent, this is a very convenient thing to accuse somebody of. So that's the premise. A little bit of history. We do know that at this point in the actual historical moment, we can talk about this, there was a crime and a trial, and we have a little bit about that trial. So I use that as the kind of. So will they or will they not succeed in extricating? It's a murder mystery in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It started out almost entirely as a murder mystery, and it grew into a lot of epic fantasy as well. So whether you're a historical mystery lover or an epic fantasy lover, or a romance lover, it kind of does that for.
Yeah, it kind of checks a lot of boxes.
Yeah.
So Before we dive too far into the interview, can you describe for our listeners exactly what the Bronze Age was? Like, kind of, which is where your story is set.
Yeah. So the Bronze Age for the Near East, that is Turkey, what's now Israel, down Mesopotamia, Babylon, all those guys,
Hmm.
has maybe about 1600 to 1700 to it ends around 1150. And then we start calling it the Iron Age.
Hmm.
So those are the years, BCE, obviously, far end of the timeline. And for the area that I'm talking about, which is modern Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, a little bit of what's somewhere in the middle of what's contemporary Israel, the Egyptians and the Hittites bumped up against each other, and their cities were going back and forth all the time. And it was a bummer for those people because one year they're paying tribute to one kingdom and the next the other, and sometimes both. And that's not a great place to live back in that time. So that's the geography. And the world that they live in, there are these big centralized kingdoms and things like really elemental things like the crops that people grew were stored in big centralized locations and distributed back out. So it was a time of very centralized authoritarian control over life.
Sure.
But that provided protection because your crop was in a fortified place. So all
Yes.
these raiders who were coming by couldn't get it. So, if you ran in at the right time, your stuff was there too. So there were good reasons for all of that protection. But it does mean you get these kings of incredible power and empires. It's the time of empires. The ruins of these fortresses are really impressive. I mean, they're only a meter or so at best tall now, but like these
Hmm.
giant, I mean, there are some walls that are bigger, but they call them cyclopean, like cyclops. They're like these huge, much taller than you rocks, and they're carved so that they kind of fit together like puzzles. The temples would have these much more refined stones. My husband comes along when we go on research trips, and he's my photographer, and he now can say, "Oh, I know the temple must be over there because there's ashlar block, which is like this beautifully carved stone. And it's usually stippled on the outside, so it has this texture, and it's very beautiful. And you can tell, oh, that was the really classy building over there. That must be the temple." And so the ruins are impressive and interesting to look at. They had the Hittite capital, which was called Hattusa, which is about like maybe a 2-hour drive out of Ankara, kind of north and east. It's a big UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's incredibly cool. It's a great place to go. But it has like these tunnels that go into the city, and it's got one side of the fortifications that looks sort of like a pyramid. It's like smooth stone that's fit into
Hmm.
a angular side. And some of that was just plain to be impressive so that when people came, they'd go, "Oh, this is a big empire," like bow
Yep.
down and so there was a lot of that was fortification wise, but a lot of it was just to be impressive. And those walls are, I mean, four guys across with their arms spread out would be the thickness of the walls. They were double casement walls. And so big cities
Hmm.
with acres and acres of city. But most people lived on small little farms out in the country, like all scattered around. We find
Hmm.
big dams and things like that. There was just it was a fairly advanced stage. These big cities had running water. Your waste got carried away. They didn't have electricity, but other than that, they were, pretty contemporary, comfortable places for the most part. Much more comfortable and much fancier than a lot of medieval cities in Europe. So that's a little taste.
I was curious to know because admittedly I am not an expert when it comes to the Bronze Age. Like I know just a little bit, like, but not nearly enough to know exactly what would have been real versus artistic liberty when it came to your descriptions of like the temples and the different areas of the city that you described in the book. It was very interesting, like picturing this world that I'm sure people who aren't familiar with it would compare it to, like ancient Rome or something as far as how things are laid out to a sense. But the way you describe the different sections of the city, I was like, oh, I can kind of guess what that smells like. Or, oh, I can kind of guess how dirty or how clean this area would be compared to others. And it was just, you painted the picture of like the environment so well that it was almost like kind of being dropped into like an adventure game or something where you're like, okay, I'm in the middle of this square and it's going to be this beautiful temple's going to be over here, and then the huts and everything are going to be over here. And so it was really cool to read the picture that you painted.
Well, thank you. That's my goal. I want the total immersion. And I have to say, my general rule of thumb is that all the physical environment stuff is as accurate as I can make it. And all of
Mhm.
my archaeology friends who really know this stuff love what I write. Like, I get the seal of accuracy approval from them. And the historical events that are the basic skeleton are all accurate.
Mhm.
And then we go from there, wildly off script.
Yep. Yeah, it was even to the point where you were describing like the patterns that would be on people's tunics and stuff, which is a big deal in part of the murder mystery, which I won't
Yeah,
spoil for anybody, but
yeah.
like that was fascinating too, just like the different clothes that the different clans would wear. So you would know like, oh, you were part of Pharaoh's people, or oh, you were, part of these people. And yeah, it was just cool. I like that kind of stuff.
That stuff is very cool, and part of that I had to get from, like, comparative anthropological stuff because fabrics are not one of the things that we have a lot surviving. Little bits, we
Yep.
know what they were made out of. We have stone carvings that show us what this particular queen looked like theoretically, like, how accurate a stone carving is, we don't
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
So we know kind of dress styles and stuff like that, but some of that you have to I have to make a story and I have to make immersion. But yeah.
As you've mentioned, you based the heroine of your series, Tesha, on a real life Hittite queen named, and I hopefully won't mispronounce it.
Hoodoo Hepa.
I
Yes.
was gonna do it right.
Early
Yes.
on, my agent said, "I will not take a book with that name as the main character." And that was when I was still thinking it would be historical mystery and I hadn't gone off the deep end with fantasy. And I said, "Okay, I'll call her Tesha as a nickname," which means in Hittite, it's a Hittite word for dream. And this queen, the actual
Okay.
historic queen, is famous for these visionary dreams that she said were sent by the goddess. She totally believed them. There are people who are really cynical about what she believed and thought. I really think this was a person who totally believed, absolutely sincerely, that the goddess spoke to her, that she guided her life that way. She clearly made her decisions that way. And there were some times where they got some really impressive help that they attributed to the goddess. And hey, I don't know where else it came from. So as a
Yep.
novelist, I just let that, sure.
Yep.
And
We'll
then
go with
as
it.
the series goes, the goddess gets more and more problematic as an ally. There are times where, in my sort of understanding of ancient literature and the whole attitude towards the gods, is that being mortal and thus being aware of like a finite life gives you a quality of meaningfulness that escapes mortals and
Mhm.
immortals, and immortals just never quite get what matters in life. And
Mhm.
so if you're going to guide your life by an immortal at some point, that's going to be problematic, and I think that's
Yep.
great fun. That's one of the sort of arc of the series things that I enjoy, like, okay, if you're really sincere in your love of this goddess, that's going to be a conflict at some point.
Well, yeah, especially if she's the goddess of love and war. So it's like
Mhm.
there's a good and bad side to that. And of course, that's going to cause problems. And it does in the first book. And I'm assuming it continues throughout the rest of the
It gets
series.
worse. Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, I was assuming it was going to be one of those it gets worse before it gets better type of situations. So, what specifically was it about this queen that kind of drew you to her as like your muse for your main character?
Well, I was just intrigued that she enters the stage at about 15, roughly. We don't know exactly. And we know because there are all these written records in the form of clay tablets. We have a judicial decree of hers while she was still great queen. It must be, we know from some of the references in it, she must be in her 80s. Well, just to be alive then is kind of amazing at that
Yeah.
point in history. But that's a long time to be on the stage of history. And if she were like, we think of the great queens, Elizabeth I, there's a sort of notorious Queen Cleopatra, all these people that we know immediately who we're referring to, even if you don't know very much about them.
Hmm.
And I was really struck that none of us know this woman. I have advanced degrees in this area, and nobody taught me anything about Hittites when I was a classicist. Hittites actually a sort of earlier form of Greek. I can access all this stuff about this academically, doesn't show in the books I write, but I can go there. But it's a really new field because the geography of Turkey was not an area that got explored by archaeologists. There was kind of this prejudice, oh, that's the Ottoman Empire. When you think of the period of time when like Babylon and Egyptology and all
Sure.
of that, Napoleon, all that stuff,
Hmm.
no one thought that the East was bad.
Yeah.
There was, they were inferior people. Just all these ugly prejudices kept people from, there were exotic things like Babylon that were worth exploring, but who goes to Turkey? So yeah,
Yep.
that was a big mistake because here it was really one of the biggest empires. Egypt and Babylon were the rivals of this empire, but it got lost. And people go, oh, but there are Hittites in the Bible. But those are what we now call Neo Hittites. They were like as if one tiny town in the United States had survived some giant, collapse, economic and otherwise collapse. And, like small town was saying, we're the United States. Well, that's those,
Yeah.
was fringe people way after everything had collapsed. So I wanted to find out, I wanted to give her life.
Hmm.
When I started writing about her, the only stuff that was around to read about her world and her were these early translations of some of the first tablets that were getting translated and published and translated, and site reports of archaeological digs. I mean, I was piecing together this culture by the, clawing through and most
Yep.
boring possible source material. Now there are some lovely overview books there are a couple historians of this period who now 20 years after I started on this are have published academically interesting but nice approachable books, but not when I started. So she just needed to be popularized. And I think powerful women, we sometimes think of history as somehow like we're making some overall progress towards women's rights or something, and we just aren't. Like we keep going backwards. And
Hmm.
Victorian women had almost no rights whatsoever. Once they married, that's it. They're chattel. They're their
Yep.
husband's property. They can't own anything. They have no control over their children's fates. Nothing. Well,
Hmm.
Hittite women could get divorced, keep their children. They owned property. There are all these things that they had, and their great queens carried on being great queen when their husbands died. And yes, some other man became great king. They're usually their son, but I mean, in her case, it was clear who was the boss. Her
Yeah.
son. The series does not go that far. This 4-book series, but at some point I may return and do the latter half, which must have been some really interestingly tense family dynamics, because you can imagine when mom, is there and you're trying to make yourself into a great king and everyone's paying no attention to you. So that's a whole
Yep.
different dynamic that isn't part of my series, but I enjoy. So she just needed to be dug literally dug out and
Hmm.
celebrated. She was
That's
really
awesome.
good diplomat. Like she models everything that's good about female leadership as opposed to male leadership. And, that's something we should popularize,
Yeah.
make the model.
Like, even in just the first book, which admittedly is the only book that I have read of the series so far, but she was very diplomatic in challenging things that to her didn't make sense. And which, I mean, if she had been, as you mentioned, in the Victorian era, she would have been like thrown in the insane asylum for doing anything remotely similar to that.
Yeah.
But it just seemed like this was something where it was okay for her to do that to some extent.
I mean, it's a patriarchal world, but it's one in which women had, interestingly, a fair amount of room to move around in. And I
Yep.
think that's a good reason to look at this, to write fiction set in this world, because
Hmm.
we still live in a patriarchal world. Contemporary America has not gotten nearly as freed up as it should, as we like to pretend.
Hmm.
So looking at how you navigate that successfully and become powerful and influential, that's just an entirely worthwhile. And it isn't like preachy or anything. I
No.
don't say that in my books. It's just that's the sort of underlying current that flows through.
Hmm. So we haven't touched on it yet, but you mentioned the magic in your novels, because this is a fantasy series, so there is magic involved, are based on the beliefs of this time and place. And we kind of mentioned curses at the beginning, but what are some of the strangest beliefs that were kind of woven into your series?
They thought that, well, their worldview is that there are three levels. There's the world underneath, there's this world, and then there's the gods up above. There's kind of demonic-y kind of gods underneath, but it's not a hell. Like there's a sun goddess of the world underneath, and they're not bad intrinsically, but danger. It's
Yes.
there. And when you're dead, you might go down there. That seems like what they thought, but unless you're of the royal family, you're unlikely to have much existence down there. So there's not a vivid afterlife or anything. But they thought that the gods influenced all kinds of things and that you could get the gods to magically do what you wanted. They practice what we call analogic magic. So, like they'd say, like the wind blows through the tree, I want you to, blow away this wall of this fortress so that I can, take my army through it. That's a really like simplified thing. And they have
Sure.
all but they have all these elaborate rites of that are based on the concept of analogy to make things happen, and they really believed that they happened. But then they also have there's all this pollution in the world because these three levels have to be kept in harmony, so that
Hmm.
everything is based on the concept of keeping things in harmony. And anytime that gets out of whack, like an illness, you have to restore the harmony by getting rid of whatever's polluting. So, for example, when Tesha, my main character, has to get this curse that opens the novel cleaned up, she uses this loaf of bread, and this is straight off a tablet. Like this is the
That's
actual
awesome.
thing she would have done to get rid of a curse as a priestess of Ishtar, right? I call her Ishana. And they put like hummus inside, like chickpea paste, smushed up
Hmm.
chickpeas. Very absorbent. Good plan. Like, the logic of all of this is so good. And then you like stick that where this dead guy is, where this cursed being is, and get it to absorb it. And then you scoop it up on silver, because silver is the metal of purity, and you cart it over to
Hmm.
flames and you burn it up, or else you bury it. They had these big ceramic containers that were purposely ugly, and they would seal them with these lead clamps, and that's how you would, and you'd bury it in the next to a spring that would go into the underworld, and somehow all that pollution would go in the underworld. So they had various ways of
Gotcha.
purifying. And those springs were usually in caves, which is why there's this scene at the opening of the novel in a cave, because that's how you access demonic beings of good and bad sorts.
Gotcha.
But they also had like magic, like really psychologically interesting. Like they were kind of the priestesses were also like sort of our version of family therapists. So because harmony is what you want, if a husband and wife are always quarreling and there's dissent, or two members of the royal family are, trying to kill each other, whatever level of conflict,
Hmm.
the priestess would come and she would make these little models of tongues out of wax, and you would spit the bad words onto these tongues, and then she'd burn them up, and you would believe, oh, well, it's a really, you can imagine that might be a way that a married couple who just needed a fresh slate, okay,
Yep.
they got a fresh slate. So there's interesting. I used some of that when she has magic where she can influence how a person thinks. She doesn't have a lot of control. It's really tricky and it's unwieldy, and you have to make magic have a lot of rules and limitations, or it's impossible in fiction.
Well, you don't want it to be like, oh, she just does that because she can. Like
Wave a magic wand and poof. Yeah. No, 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 no,
that's not
no.
a good trope either. Like you want it to be, and I love how in the book it's like everything kind of comes with a price, and
Mhm.
it's either a good, it's a good thing, or it can be a very bad thing. So again, going to that whole like love and war type of thing, like there's always an opposite side to whatever you do, and you have to be very careful with how you are resolving certain things, because like we find out the thing that happened to her sister that was as a result of something that she did in her youth that she still like holds on to, and it's like, for every, what's that thing where for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's
Uh-huh.
kind of how I viewed the magic in this universe. Is there's always
Right.
like, it's not just, well, bam, it's fixed. There's something else is going
Nope,
to happen
nope.
afterwards.
You go bam here, you're gonna get an equal uh-oh bam there. Yeah.
Yep. It's not an equal exchange of things. There's always something else that kind of unexpected results can happen based off
Yeah.
whatever you do.
So my magic, yeah, it's not like fantasy writers have really systematized and scientific, but all of the sort of instinctive way it's done is based on this Hittite cultural model. And as you say, all of that, and as I said, that's all on this idea of harmony and, as you pointed out,
Hmm.
action reaction. So that's the sort of
Yep.
overriding principle of the whole thing.
What sort of challenge did you kind of have to face when you were writing this series where you're holding true to the historical elements of the world, but then you're also inserting elements like griffins into the universe? So like, where does history and fantasy kind of merge in a way where you're not losing sight of either, if that makes sense?
Well, I suppose there are probably people who would say I go too far here or there. Although I have to say, the Griffins are probably the biggest leap into,
Yeah.
having fantastical beasts in your fiction is clearly fictional,
Hmm.
but they are everywhere in the art of, particularly the royal art of the whole Mediterranean basin, Near East of this period. So they're painted around thrones, on frescoes, they're on seals that you sign your documents with. They're just everywhere. And they were used as a symbol of power and of,
Yep.
control, which, when there's my griffins, when I actually have them enter the physical world of my fiction, are, they're in essence like the nuclear bombs of the period, because they're huge. They're just like huge beings. They're building sized. They're not. My current the book that's just come out, Flights of Treason, on May 7th. The cover art is gorgeous. I love it, and it has my main character, riding a griffin, and that happens, and but in order to work as art on a cover that's going to be on a thumbprint,
Yeah.
the character and the griffin look sort of similarly sized, which is completely inaccurate, but it, cover art
Yeah.
communicates a quick message. But in fact, they're huge, and they communicate much more quickly and fully than we do as human beings. They look at talking as just like what a slow and awkward way of communicating, and writing is just really silly. Like, why would you take so long to put words into, into the world of communicating that way? Because they're telepathic, and so they have a
Mhm.
whole world. That's all imaginary, clearly. And
Mhm.
bless the ancient Near East, there's practically no mythology about griffins. They're everywhere as iconography. They're symbolic of power and regalness and all of that. There's a few funny late stories about them collecting gold, stacks of gold and stuff like that, sort of a la dragons, the way dragons are
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
hordes are somehow always associated with big creatures. I guess that's because we
Yeah.
as human beings assume, oh, if you're that big and powerful, of course you would just go after your money, because we're such idiots as
Yep.
living
Yep.
things. That's all we imagine could be of value. And so, Sky, I can do what I like with them mythologically, and they're fun. But yeah, it's a stretch. I have to say, again, my archaeologist friends who work in this realm are like, of course you had to put them in. Of course they're alive. Yeah. Go for it. Go for it. So it does not offend the purist historians who really know this period, although obviously it is fantastical.
So we kind of discussed the power and restrictions that women had during this period of time. What sort of role would the priestess serve in this sort of community? The temples are obviously very important in the society because of how intricate the designs are on the interior and the exterior. So what sort of contributions would be expected from somebody who was a priest or a priestess in this sort of culture?
The priestesses, there were different kinds. So some of them were actually sort of what we would think of as doctors, healers. And I have a conflict between Tesha, who is not that kind of priestess, and a woman who is older and considerably wiser in this first book, with somebody who is out in the community as a healer and a priestess. So she's more commonsensical that way, and has
Hmm.
had to acquire that wisdom by experience. So there's that. Priestesses, because most of them were literate, they would read and write. A lot of them, they needed to in order to acquire the knowledge for the rites that they did. But they would be like the kind of thing that my priestess would do. She would go and do these sort of rites of, getting your quarrels settled, and I mean all those kinds of therapeutic things. But she also, like, you would come and bring an offering to the temple, and your first fruits or your whatever, you, in the same way that we think of in the Judeo-Christian early, sort of at the temple
Yep.
there. So the well-being of the community is dependent upon her interaction with the gods on your behalf. And if that didn't go well and she didn't do her job well, then you were big time screwed.
Yeah.
So they were learned sources, and they were protective sources. The government, in the case of the town where she is, the governor is equivalent to the high priest. So her father, made up the title Grand Votary because a kind of way of communicating. It's religious, but it's also government. There was certainly no separation of
Sure.
church and state. So her father is, in essence, the governor. And these temples had huge treasuries. They were very wealthy. They had lots of acreage of land that was owned, had been dedicated to the goddess or god, and they controlled it. So they were governmental institutions, and they could rival the royal family at times. We see that more often in Egypt, where the priests and the pharaoh can have open warfare together, but against each other. That was a little less true of the Hittite environment. There seems to be more control of the various priestly centers. But so, yeah, she'd be kind of like, part university professor, part doctor, part, priest, part the guy, maybe the attorney general. She'd
Yep.
decide disputes, that kind of thing. So she had a lot of different roles. She's very young when this book starts. So how much of that she's able to do, she's quite capable. And there weren't teenage adolescence is a modern invention that the ancient world didn't have the luxury of.
So, in regards to some of the other characters that we see in the book, such as King Hattu and his second in command, is it?
Marak.
I loved him. What sort of research did you have to do to create kind of like the side characters, like your soldiers and your assassins and even like the lowly shepherds or whatever? Just like what sort of research did you have to conduct to be able to craft those characters as well?
Well, I had to figure out the whole armaments thing because people
Yep.
care so much about what the weapons are. Are they accurate? That in fantasy,
Yep.
that is a don't make mistakes there. So I try really hard. We have a lot of those. There are great museum collections with that. And I've, gone to Turkey several, more than once, shall we say, and have all kinds of research photographs of all these collections and have read in terms of like what their rights and structures and like how the military was set up. That's just a lot of academic reading about, you know, conclusions people have drawn from all these tablets that are translated and how the empire was structured. And we actually have some great letters from soldiers who were out in garrisons in trouble spots in the empire back to the great king. Hey, I need more chariots. I need this. Do I execute these guys? Do I blind these prisoners? Which was a standard practice. It's just like so creepy
Ugh.
that I
Yeah.
include in my fiction in with all of it, with a recognition of the creepiness. All of those things come, all those little bits of understanding. I just kind of have read and read and read for a long time and have that underpinning how I build these characters. So, and Marak's kind of backstory about not having gotten married and why and all of those things, those are taken from narratives that from these letters that we just get
Sure.
little bits of.
So you've mentioned that you've traveled to some of these places, which is awesome that you're able to see some of these places, which I'm sure is very helpful as an author to be able to see the places and be able
Yeah,
to
and
describe them if you see them.
they're very ruined ruins, but if you get the actual physical place that they're in, then, you can start putting stones on top of each other in your imagination.
Yep, exactly. I'm curious, are there any misconceptions that you've encountered about this period in history that you would like to see cleared up?
Oh, what a good question. Misconceptions. Well, I suppose the idea that women didn't have any ability. I mean, everyone always goes, "Oh, they couldn't do anything then," and in fact, they're quite powerful. And not just this one woman who ruled. Their daily life. We get records of the wife of a merchant will write back. You've been gone, on this trip with your donkey caravan for 6 months, and I've done the following things, and I'm sorry if you don't agree with me, but that's just how we're gonna play this whole thing. And they'll have made these big decisions and they were conducting business because how else was, they'd have these far-flung
Hmm.
family businesses, and they just do that. And that was entirely legal. And as I say, there was as many literate women in these temples in many ways as near as we can tell. That we have all these documents signed by women, so we know.
So, as you kind of mentioned, the fourth and final installment of the Tesha series is set to be released on May 7th. What are your thoughts and feelings about sort of bringing a close to her story?
Well, I have to say, because she lives on for a long time,
Yep.
so why end here? I will not spoil it, but it's such a natural closure point, and I think people don't want I think it's fun to read a series knowing that you will get to a place of completion
Hmm.
and to know that that's already written, and, if a bus takes me out tomorrow, you'll still get to read the ending. And so partly that was it felt it felt like it would be really artificial to say, no, this isn't the end. On the other hand, there are all these secondary characters who, as you pointed out, like you like Marak, most people love her sister Janiti, and
Mm-hmm.
playing the blind sister steals the show. And later in the series, there are Flights of Treason. One of the main characters is only 4 years old, but she also steals the show, and she's very magical and has lots of fun features that it would be great to write a series with her as the center. So, you know, there are lots of series that are very popular that people then spin off side
Mm-hmm.
series, and
Yep.
it allows you to pick up wherever you want, and you can just read the side ones, or you can read. So I will not say that I will not be returning. I probably will at some point. Right now
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually working on a mythic retelling that's more in the Greek tradition of mythology, back to my sort of Trojan War cycle of myths. And that's really fun. And I'm having a hugely good time with that book. But, you know.
Is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know about the Priestess of Ishana and the rest of the Tesha series?
Well, we've done a pretty good job.
Because we don't want to spoil too much. We want people
Yeah,
to like.
I was trying to think, anything that covers the whole arc is going to be a spoiler. I think maybe one thing to know is since Priestess of Ishana is, I think, what we could call a reluctant hero, and it's an
Mm-hmm.
emergent magic kind of situation, the fantastical elements and the magic increases over the series. So by the time you're at Flights of Treason, and that's kind of symbolized by my covers. I mean, Priestess of Ishana, there she is standing there. There's magic spinning around her hands and all, but
Mm-hmm.
she's a person. The last, she's sitting on the back of a griffin. So
Yep.
that is kind of symbolic of how the series overall increases in the. So that's probably a good thing to know for readers.
Yeah. Take that as you will. Things are going to be more fantastical by the end.
Yeah, I mean, I did in this last book have to write a battle that had humans, sorcerers, fantastical beasts. I was no longer just focused. Do I have these Bronze Age weapons correct? Let's just say that. It does have some very cool Bronze Age engineering and weapons and all of that cool stuff, but that was only one of many parts that I had to sort out in order to get this thing to go.
You also have another series about the Trojan War, which you also kind of mentioned. Would you like to tell our listeners more about that before we kind of bookend the interview?
All right. Right now, there's just one book in that. That was my first novel. I got started on the whole thing of becoming a fiction writer after many, many years of teaching the Iliad. The main character, the sort of main conflict in the Homeric poem has this woman at its center, and she gets no voice, no lines, nothing, except that we get told that when she gets taken away from Achilles, who has, mind you, captured her in war, killed her husband, killed her brothers, and turned her into a slave from a queen, right? You would not
Mm-hmm.
think this is romantically, not wining and dining her. Let's just put it that way.
Yep.
She nonetheless goes away from him to this guy who's taken her, this other king who has taken her away, all unwillingly is a translation of the Greek. Really? Why is that? That my first book is basically, why is that? If we can accept that that's, myths, there's every different version, and the Iliad is an extended myth in a way. I mean, it's this
Mm-hmm.
oral tradition poem. It's got all these different interpretive layers, and it's all, you get to choose how you want to approach it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody approaches these. There've been, since I wrote Hand of Fire, there have been a number of really well-written Trojan War books. There's Song of Achilles, and most recently, in some ways, the Thousand Ships, Natalie Haynes' book. There's some really, everybody has a different Briseis. My Briseis came early in this whole cycle of Trojan War books. And as I say, I'm now returning before the Trojan War in the same cycle of myths, but before Achilles came to Troy, there is this episode in his life, and that's what it's actually a book about a woman, but he triggers events in her life, and he's sort of the
Okay.
marquee character in that. I tend to write with women as my primary focus of character, as
Mhm.
main characters, and the men in their lives they're usually the sources of of power, and so they're the navigation around that and the dynamics of that power dynamic is interesting and intriguing to me.
So, outside of your novels, if our listeners are interested in learning more about this period in history, what sort of advice would you give them on where to kind of look to learn more about Hitolians and all that?
Yes, they can go to my website, which you type Hittite into Google, at least most recently. I am the supposedly the expert on the web, which is not true. There are like people way more knowledgeable about the Hittites than I am by a long shot. But I have a lot of popularly comfortable, easy to read history on my website. So judithstarkston.com is a really good place to go. There is a wonderfully articulate and pretty clear writer, Trevor Bryce, Bryce, and he has the kingdom of the Hittites and life and society in the Hittite world. Those are, they're not quick, easy reads, but they give you the world. And there are some others, various other people, but I do have a bibliography on my website, and that'll have lots of books about
Okay.
it.
Thank you so much again for being on today, Judith. And before we go, would you mind telling our listeners more about where they can find you online and then remind them when your fourth book comes out?
All right. I have a website with all of my books and background history and a weekly update blog that's usually got a snippet of history. And that is my name. So judithstarkston.com. And my books are all on Amazon. They're in Kindle Unlimited. So for those who have subscriptions to that, you can read them all for free. And I get paid. It's a great deal. I am easily enough found on Facebook and Instagram, and I've recently attempted to get involved on TikTok, but that's fun. But I tend to spend most of my life sitting at my laptop writing novels, but I do have on my website, if you subscribe to my newsletter, which is where you could keep in touch with me most easily, you also get a free novella, which has got no human beings in it. It's all griffins. So if that is intriguing, that comes for free, along with a cookbook, because I really take the sensory experiences of my novels seriously, and I actually make recipes before I describe food in my books.
Hmm.
And so you get a cookbook. So that's there. And I have, as I say, a weekly blog on my website. And you can subscribe to the author newsletter, and then the weekly blog is separate. You can do both or one or whichever you want.
Well, thank you again for making time to come on the podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And on that note, as always, I'm Lindsay, and we'll see you next time with another tale as old as crime.